There is a trend going on in the world of horror films that I find deeply concerning. You see, in the past decade or so, there has been a concerted effort to elevate the horror genre to the realm of prestige cinema. And while this isn't inherently a bad thing, it's also had some unintended consequences that could potentially endanger the future of scary movies. That's why today, we'll be taking a look at the evolution of terrifying cinema, examining what caused this fundamental problem with the genre, and analyzing how a film like 2022's The Menu just might be how we fix it. As an appetizer, let's start off with a little bit of context. The overall genre of horror has existed almost as long as the medium of film itself. Many of the most iconic images from cinema history belong to films that are meant to terrify. For instance, Universal's line of monster movies are largely seen as the definitive depictions of characters like Dracula, the Mummy, or Frankenstein's creation. Furthermore, someone like Alfred Hitchcock, who's viewed by many as one of the all-time greats of filmmaking, primarily worked within the genre confines of horror and suspense. The reason I point all this out is because it's important to remember that for a long time, it wasn't all that unusual to think of horror and high cinema in the same breath. However, nowadays, the genre is often looked down upon by more pretentious filmgoers and critics, and a lot of this has to do with the audience scary movies are often targeted towards. See, the fundamental goal of movies is to make the audience feel something. Joy, sorrow, laughter, honestly, any emotion will do. Good movies make us empathize with the characters on screen and feel the ups and downs of their journey as if we were experiencing it ourselves. Horror movies, however, specifically seek to make the audience feel scared. And just like with, say, roller coasters, there are some people who love the adrenaline rush, while others will shut their eyes and try their best not to cry. This inherently creates a polarized response to the genre, and as a result, horror films have a more limited audience that they can rely on to buy tickets. However, that same audience is often highly dedicated. This phenomenon is why studios often put out relatively low-effort horror movies. They know that if they can keep the budget low and have a few decent scares, their target demographic will more than likely come to see the film. It winds up being a fairly low-risk investment that pays off more often than it doesn't. But as I mentioned earlier, there's recently been a push to return scary cinema to its former glory. Films like Get Out, A Quiet Place, Hereditary, and The Witch all mark a significant crossover between the genre of horror and prestige filmmaking. But why is that? Well, for our second course, we have maybe society was the real allegory all along. You see, in addition to just being highly polished and thoughtfully crafted, most of the films I just mentioned are largely allegorical. For instance, in the same way George Orwell's Animal Farm is an allegory for the Russian Revolution, Jordan Peele's Get Out serves as an allegory for the exploitation and commodification of black bodies throughout history. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with allegory. In the films listed previously, the allegorical elements add further depth to the story, which allows for thoughtful analysis and interesting interpretations. More than perhaps any other genre, horror is perfectly suited to facilitate allegory. The plots and conflicts are often straightforward: survive the night, kill the monster, or even get to the chopper! Which allows the writer to layer on deeper themes without bogging down the core narrative. But this is where the problem truly lies. You see, I believe that many filmmakers have taken away the wrong lessons from the mainstream success of quote-unquote smart horror. Allegory alone does not make for a good movie. It just enhances it. Sure, it's great that A Quiet Place is about grief, family trauma, and learning to forgive yourself, but that movie is successful because it is a masterclass in suspense that would make even Hitchcock himself spill his popcorn. Far too many movies nowadays over-intellectualize their own themes and messages. Don't Worry Darling, for example, is so focused on what its deeper meaning is that nothing significant actually takes place in the film itself. Many Many filmmakers try so desperately to make their films appeal to critics and film analysts that they wind up losing sight of what makes movies appeal to people in the first place. Horror in particular is all about being a visceral experience that engages the audience from one moment to the next. If you obfuscate that too heavily with metaphor and allegory, then you're fundamentally working in the wrong genre. So then, how are you supposed to balance scares and suspense with intellectual impact? Well, for our final course this evening, we have an analysis of 2022's The Menu, which I have titled "The Cheeseburger is a Metaphor." Personally, I found The Menu to be a breath of fresh air. It was a tightly executed horror thriller that contained not a single ounce of pretense or ego. In fact, it's kind of all about how over-intellectualizing the things we consume inherently ruins art of any kind. And not in an allegorical way either. The characters literally tell us that in the film, and the story is quite directly meant to satirize pretentious critics and the effect they have on their industry. Basically, Voldemort plus a nose is a highly regarded chef on the island restaurant of Hawthorne. It's an incredibly exclusive venue, and he has invited a hand-picked group of guests to present a multi-course meal that he believes is going to be his masterpiece. However, our protagonist Margot sticks out like a sore thumb among the ritzy one-percenters that make up the rest of the guest list. She finds the over-the-top presentation highly pretentious and is critical of how others try to control the way in which she enjoys the food. Once dinner properly commences, the tension continues to rise with each and every course as it becomes more and more apparent that something sinister is going on. Eventually, it's revealed that the chef and his staff intend to end the lives of everyone in the restaurant, including their own, as a way to punish them for their various sins, some admittedly not quite as serious as others.
What school did you go to?
Brown?
I'm sorry, you're dying.
What I respect most about this film is how simple and straightforward it is. The central conceit is, what if a chef decided to murder the patrons of his restaurant? And by the end of the movie, that's exactly what he does, with one exception. See, it's revealed that Anya Taylor-Joy's character wasn't actually supposed to be at Hawthorne. It turns out that she's an escort who was hired to be Nicholas Hoult's date after he broke up with his intended +1. And this is where the most interesting aspects of the menu come into play. Margot is the only person who ever gives Chef Slowick pause. Her lack of interest in his theatrics makes him quickly realize that she too is a service worker of sorts, and as such, he demands for her to choose which side she belongs to, customer or provider. But Margot doesn't think like Chef Slowick, and doesn't believe that the relationship between the two sides is inherently adversarial. See, despite the stigma around her line of work, Margot admits to enjoying what she does for a living. Conversely, Slowick's profession no longer brings him any happiness at all, and this is what ultimately allows Margot to escape. After finding a picture of the chef as a fry cook in his office, Margot decides to simply ask Slowick to make her a cheeseburger. Not a fancy one with complex ingredients, just beef, bun, and American cheese. The process of making such a simple dish and seeing Margot enjoy it momentarily reminds the chef of why he started cooking food in the first place, and as a thank you, he allows her to take the burger to go, sparing her life in the process. Now, at risk of sounding pretentious myself, this cheeseburger is a metaphor for modern horror movies and the current disconnect between film critics and your typical audience. There are many who believe that a film can only be good if it is complex or intellectually stimulating, but in reality, if an audience enjoys or appreciates a movie, no matter how simplistic it is, then that film is in fact a success. When art is made with the critic in mind, all joy is inevitably stripped away from the product. But when an artist enjoys the process and makes it with their intended audience in mind, you can feel the love in every frame. This is why the menu is so amazing. It doesn't feel the need to hide behind allegory. It has a clear and literal message, which is integrated into a film that is enjoyable to watch on a moment-to-moment basis. It isn't concerned with being perceived as smart or clever. It simply seeks to deliver a quality story. And that is what all films, regardless of genre, should strive to do as well. Speaking of high-quality content, I encourage you to click on this playlist to check out more video essays like this one. I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.